Well, heidi ho, boys and girls, mostly boys. I think women represent 1.5% of my audience. So we've got some, but not many. So mostly boys. I should probably call you gentlemen. This is Caleb Jones, and this is the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast. One of the very significant differences that we have experienced here in the modern era as compared to previous eras is the status of being an employee. So this goes back to the 1990s. Surprising the number of people who aren't aware of this, even though it has changed the lifestyle of just about everyone in the Western world, certainly Americans, certainly Canadians, certainly Europeans. All of these things happened at slightly different times in these countries, but these things all happened. And they happened around the 90s. The 90s was the decade where this occurred. I've written articles about this. In the 1990s, two bedrock foundations of Western society vanished. They went away. And those two bedrock foundations were lifetime marriage and lifetime employment. So what I mean is, prior to the 90s, statistically speaking, not literally everybody, but statistically speaking, the vast majority of people, when you got married, you were married more or less for the rest of your life. Divorce occurred, but the numbers were very low. Back in the 50s, the divorce rate was somewhere around 7%. And it was about the same in the 60s. It started rising a little in the 70s. It rose a little more in the 80s, but it was still pretty low. It was not the 76% plus that it is today. So if you got married prior to the 1990s, you could be reasonably assured, statistically speaking anyway, that you were probably going to be married for the rest of your life. What was also true prior to the 1990s, and the further back in time you go, the more this was true, is that when you got a job from the big American or Canadian or European corporation, Acme Corporation, or insert your favorite company name there, IBM, General Motors, whatever, you were more or less assured a job for life. And you basically stayed at that company your entire life. Several decades. You might move around in terms of positions within the company, but you stayed in that company for most of your life, if not all of your life, your working lifetime. You got what was called a pension, which they don't really have anymore unless you're a government employee. But if you work in the private sector, you don't have pensions anymore. But prior to the 90s, certainly back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, blah, 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 70s, you had, even in the private sector, you had a thing called a pension, where your employer put some money every month into this rock solid bank account, and it was guaranteed to be there when you retired, and it really was there when you retired, certainly prior to the 1970s, and you could rely on this. And so you could have one job, stay there for decades, your company would never fire you, your company would take care of you, and you could retire on your pension within your company. And that was the scenario prior to the 90s. Now, what happened in the 90s? Well, a few things happened in the 90s. Number one, the baby boomer generation took over Western society and the equivalents in other countries, but that's what we call it in the United States. The baby boomer generation was, up until that point, the most left-wing generation Western society had ever seen. Today, that has been certainly surpassed by the millennials and also Generation Z. But back then, that was a left-wing generation, and they came on in and they moved society to the left, and they started doing things like celebrating single motherhood and things like that. All the things you've seen angry, conservative, right-wing, red pill guys bitch about for decades. That's all that stuff started in the 90s. And that was the impetus for lifetime marriage going away. Things like more feminist policies and divorce law, all that stuff really gained traction in the 1990s. So that eliminated, for the most part, lifetime marriage. What also occurred was, and I went through this personally because I experienced this in my early career, starting when I was 18 years old in the early 90s, the outsourcing phenomenon. So as the American government cranked down more and more on American business and raised taxes, and in the 80s eliminated a lot of tax loopholes and applied more restrictions and laws and regulations on American businesses. American business said, well, this is bullshit. Let's just have our jobs be done in other countries. And so in the early 1990s, they started outsourcing all their functions to other countries where it cost less money. And I was actually a part of this. My first real, quote unquote, full-time job when I was 19 years old. Actually, I got this job 4 or 5 days before I turned 19, so I was 18 years old, I was technical support. I've talked about this before. I was technical support for a medium-sized software company. out in Beaverton, Oregon, way back in the early 1990s, 1991, 92, somewhere around there. And this was before they outsourced all those functions to places like India. So prior to 1994-ish, if you had a piece of software that you bought from an American company and you called their tech support, holy shit, God forbid, you actually got an American in an American company in an American building, and they would help you with your problem. And that was me. I was the last generation of those people. Now, I left that company around 1993, 1994, and right as I was leaving, they were in the process of outsourcing those entire functions to places like India. And this didn't happen just in the software industry. This happened in every major industry in the Western world, across the Western world. Manufacturing, financial services, software, tech, all these things started massively outsourcing their job functions to other less expensive countries that charged less money for those services because they didn't have gigantic oppressive governments cracking down on businesses. That's what happens when you keep voting for Democrats and Republicans or the equivalent in your country for decades on end. It becomes harder and harder to do business in your country. So businesses move to other places where they can do business more easily. That's just economics 101. And if you're a left-wing guy, you may hate that, and that's fine, but that is the way the world works. As a result of this massive outsourcing, you had, for the first time, at least in American history, in the early 1990s, the outsourcing or right-sizing, there were a lot of words for it, recession in the early 1990s. Millions upon millions of people who had these lifetime jobs were suddenly laid off without warning, and they were fucked. Millions of people in the manufacturing sector in the United States, and other countries too, like Canada. Millions upon millions of people in the tech sector, eventually in the late 90s, started losing their jobs on a massive scale because of this outsourcing phenomenon. And that was the end, as of then, that was the end of lifetime employment. Today in the 2020s, can you go get a job with some corporation, even a big one, and just rely on that job for the rest of your life? No, that's laughable today. That's hilarious today. But that was the scenario prior to about 1994, 1993. That was the norm in Western economies. So we have entered into a scenario now where, and I've said this before, being an employee is worse and more risky than being self-employed. So prior to the 90s, and certainly prior to the 2000s, if you quit your job and started your own business, that was considered quote unquote risky or much more risky than being an employee. The saying back then was, well, hey, at least if you're an employee, you're safe. At least you're an employee, you're okay. You're not going to suddenly get fired or laid off for no reason. You can rely on your income. Is that true now? No. Even in the odd scenarios today of guys who have had jobs for more than 10 years at the same company, more than 15 years or 20 years, even in those scenarios, it's extremely precarious and extremely dangerous. I'll give you my favorite example. My brother-in-law, and I have several brothers-in-law, but my brother-in-law, the husband of one of my sisters, has worked at Intel, the company Intel, for a long time. I don't know the number of years, 18 years I want to say. He's a manager there. He's a corporate guy, he's a company man. And every few years, about every 3 years on average, he has these panic attacks because Intel goes through these giant waves of layoffs. And they send out the email to everyone in the company, hey, we gotta downsize and lay off more people, sorry, because we're outsourcing more stuff to, Southeast Asia. So be aware, we're gonna engage in a review of your job, and we're gonna see if you still have a job here, and blah, blah. And he is absolutely terrified. This happens every few years for the past 18, 20 years in his life. And every few years, he panics. His wife, my sister, panics. They have a family of 6. They have 4 children. And they don't live a life of happiness because he is constantly worried about getting laid off. Now, so far, he's been lucky in that he hasn't been laid off. So he still has maintained his job almost 20 years, unlike most human beings in the modern day economy. But even then, is he stable? Is he secure? Is he safe as an employee? No, he's not. He's not. I mean, he's had ulcers about this. He's had sleeping problems about this. My sister freaks out every time this happens, and it happens regularly. Does that sound fun? Does that sound like a lifestyle of long-term consistent happiness? No. So we are in a scenario now where it is more dangerous for you to be an employee of a company than to be a self-employed person. Now let's flip the conversation. And you can say to me, well, Caleb, okay, yeah, you're right. Being an employee is dangerous. I understand. Yeah, okay, we don't have the security anymore we used to have, blah, 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 blah. But starting your own business, that's not stable either. I mean, you could go out of business. I mean, what if the economy, that recession hits and your clients can't pay you and you lose your customers? And what if you can't find customers? And what if this and what if that and what if this and what if that? All right, let's talk about that. We are in now what is called the gig economy, right? Right. So we have people now in society, millions upon millions of these people. Matter of fact, my daughter's boyfriend is one of these people who really don't have a job. They haven't held a job. All they do are gigs. They do eBay gigs, TaskRabbit gigs, Craigslist stuff. They just do various gigs to pay their bills. That is a form of being self-employed. That's a very chaotic and unwise way of being self-employed, in my opinion, long term, because the stability there isn't there, you're right. But that's an example of people not relying on some big corporation to pay their bills and instead making their own money in the marketplace. If you start your own small business, and I have numerous resources on exactly how to do that. I have courses and books on exactly how to do that and get to the high income very quickly. If you start your own business and you follow certainly my advice, my basic advice of having it be location independent, number one, and having it only sell high margin products or services, number two, and focusing on marketing and sales, number three, even if you half-ass my advice, even if you half-ass it and you don't quite do all those things or you do them kind of 50%, you will make enough money to pay your own bills. And the only exception to that rule is if for some reason you need a lot of money to live, which most young men in the modern era don't. So yes, if you need $10,000 a month to live, that might be a little tricky early on to pay those bills through your own business that you just started. But my experience, it's pretty obvious about this, my experience with men under the age of 35 in the modern era today don't need a lot of money to live. You really fucking don't, right? You need to pay your rent. You got to buy some groceries. If you own a car, you got to dick with that. You might have some utility bills. And really that's about it for most guys today, most younger guys. Yes, there are exceptions. And you may be one of them, and you may be screaming right now, but Caleb, I'm only 28 and I need $6,000 a month. Okay, even in your case, you can still pull that off. If you start a business on the side from your job, like I've talked about, put in 15 hours per week or more into that business and grow that business over time, and then eventually get to the point you can quit your job and roll into that business. But if you're the type of guy who you only need a few $1,000s a month to live or less, you are more than able to start a small business in a narrow niche like I talked about, selling high margin products or services, whatever you want. Products, services, or information, doesn't really matter. You can be up and running with that kind of income relatively quickly. Now, if you have money in savings, you can even quit your job sooner, live off your savings for a little bit while you jack up your job, and that's fine. And once you have that income, even if it's $1,500 a month, let's start with some really low bullshit numbers. Let's say you're making a net profit of $1,500 a month before taxes in a small business that you've started. You are in that condition more safe, more secure, and more stress-free than an employee who makes that amount of money pre-tax. Let me give you several reasons. Reason number one, this is the biggest one by far, is taxes. 98% of all tax law in most Western countries are written for companies, not individuals. That means if you are an employee, and I've talked about this many times, and you live in the Western world, you are getting absolutely raped when it comes to you paying taxes. You are getting at least a third of your paycheck sucked out of your paycheck if you are a low income guy. If you're a more middle class guy or high income employee, you're getting 40%, 50%, and in some cases 60% of your goddamn income sucked out of your paycheck before you even get paid. And my favorite example are these guys who live in the San Francisco area, the Silicon Valley area. They make low six figures, like $110,000 a year, and they think they make $110,000 a year when in fact they make less than $50,000 a year because they're paying more than 50% in taxes because they're goddamn employees. You are going to get absolutely raped when it comes to paying taxes on the majority of your income. And as I've written about it in my blogs, the average American, and Canadians and Europeans are just as bad, if not worse, the average American pays anywhere from 51% to 70% of his total income in taxes. Why is that? Because the average American is a fucking employee. You are getting raped. If you're an employee, the only way to save money on taxes is to, get some kind of retirement plan, like an IRA or 401k, and that might help you a little. That's about it. Other than that, you're basically fucked. Your employer, and more specifically your government, is going to continue to rape you left, right, and center because you're an employee. The split second you set up a separate checking account with your own business and just designate that as a business, even if you're not making any money in your business yet, you will immediately reduce your taxes. I have said many times that I have made six-figure income for most of my adult life, and I pay between 7% and 14% grand total over the period of that time in taxes annually. Sometimes less than that. Now that I'm doing 5 flags, it's going to drop even below that. My goal is to get it down to 4%. Do you think I would be able to get away with legally paying that small amount of tax if I was a goddamn employee of a company? No. There's no way I could do it. The only way to get those kinds of tax benefits is to start your own business, which means something very significant to you if you're an employee. If you have to work 40 hours a week to make X amount of money pre-tax, if you start your own business, that means you need to make maybe half X, 1/2 X, and work 20 hours a week to make the same amount of money net after taxes. Does that make sense? Because you're not going to be paying 50% in taxes on your income, or 40% or 30% or whatever it is you think you pay. And I promise you, by the way, whatever you think you pay as an employee, whatever number you've got in your head in terms of the percentage of income you think you pay as an employee in terms of tax, that number is too low. If I sat down with you with a clipboard and went through your pay stubs and went through your finances, your entire financial life, you would be shocked how much more you're paying in taxes. But most of that, or a significant percentage of that, goes away as soon as you start a business, which means you only have to work half as much and or make half the money, or maybe 60% of the money or 70% of the money to make the same amount of money and maintain the same lifestyle you're enjoying now. Isn't that nice? That's why people who often have their own small business work far less, at least today anyway, work far less than 40 hours a week. And they can still maintain their lifestyles, while their buddy who has a goddamn job has to get into his car at 6 a.m. in the morning and drive to an office or drive to some kind of bullshit location and plant there for 9 hours and do that 5 days a week and work 40 hours a week plus commuting time. Okay, you got to add that in there for all that bullshit. And that rolls into the second horrible thing about being an employee, is that you have no control over your time. You have no control over your time, even if you work from home. Even if you're in a post-COVID scenario where you work out of your home, you do not have control over your time. Your boss controls your time. You do not control your time. Trust me. Can you work whenever the fuck you feel like it, like I can? No. You have to work at certain hours, and if you don't work those hours, and you try not to work those hours and you get caught, you're in big fucking trouble and you're gonna get fired. Whereas I can work literally whenever the fuck I feel like it. Literally whenever I feel like it. If I want to stop working at noon on a Tuesday and go have sex with one of my FBs and then go watch a movie and just fart around for the rest of the day, I can do that. I have the freedom to do that. If I want to work on a Sunday, I can do that. If you're an employee, can you go to the office and work on a Sunday and really get real work done? Maybe, maybe not, depends on the scenario. Often you can't. So you don't have freedom over your time. And one of the core aspects of long-term happiness is the ability to control your time and set your own schedule. I've talked about this. I wrote about this in one of my books, The Unchained Man, where when I was reading Donald Trump's original autobiography, which is a terrible fucking book, I don't recommend it, but when I read about his schedule, the thing that impressed me was not that he made a lot of money and not that he lived in a fancy apartment made out of gold and none of that bullshit. What impressed me was, because I was an employee when I read that book years ago as a young man, what impressed me about him was he could just do whatever he wanted. He could leave the office whenever he wanted. He could go do appointments, personal appointments in his personal life whenever he wanted. He could go to the school and watch his kids or do a family meeting or teacher meeting whenever he wanted. He had complete control over his time. And that's what impressed me, the freedom of that. And you have no fucking freedom as an employee. You have none. That's why it is worse to be an employee than to have your own business. In your own business, you have freedom of time. Even if you use the age-old argument which is not necessarily true today, but the age-old argument where they say, well, but if you have your own business, you got to work double the hours. That's not true anymore. That was true in a pre-internet era. That was true today. It's not. I just explained a lot of guys I know who do gigs or have small businesses work less hours than employees, not more. But even if you do work more hours or the equivalent, you can work them whenever the fuck you want. It makes a big, 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 big difference. One of the many reasons why guys who start their own side businesses, who have jobs, have trouble getting those side businesses, those incomes up, is because their goddamn job sucks up 40, 50 hours a week of their time. So it's difficult to start a business when you have this other stupid big monster called a job sucking up that much time. And in many cases, I've talked to guys about this. Some guys come home from work at 5, 6 p.m. and they're exhausted. They're just exhausted. They have exhausting jobs. And they're like, oh my God, I just don't have the energy to spend another 2 hours on my own business. I'm exhausted. What do I do? Because you have a fucking job, you fucking loser. And that's what you are when you have a job, in my opinion. Yes, I'm being tough about this, but this is my opinion. The beta male lifestyle is the job lifestyle. That means you have to go to a building, or even if you work at home, you got to sit on your computer for 8, 9 hours a day because your fucking boss tells you so. And if you don't do it, you're fired. I mean, in some extreme examples, this was the case when I had my first job back in my early 20s. We actually had to get permission to go to the bathroom because we had to man the phones. We were in a call center doing tech support. It's not like I could just get up out of my desk and just take a piss whenever I wanted. No, I had to coordinate my schedule with the other people on my team with these little flags. We had to put a little colored flag up to say, I'm going to the bathroom now. And it was like being in goddamn kindergarten when I was a grown adult. That's the kind of bullshit you have to put up with when you have a job. That never happens when you have a business. Never, ever, ever, ever happens when you have a business. Let me give you the next reason why having a job is bullshit and having a business is much better, even if the business makes a little less money. And that is, this is a big one, and people forget about this, and I've gotten a lot of emails from you guys complaining about this, you guys at jobs, is that when you have a job, you have to work with people you don't like. Don't you? See, as soon as I said that, you immediately conjured up some names in your head. If you have a job of several people you have to work with who you hate. People who are unprofessional, people who are stupid, people who are incompetent, people in some cases are angry and loud and abusive and shitty. That could be coworkers, it could be your boss, it could be your boss's boss, it could be coworkers in another department. I mean, I can tell you all kinds of horror stories I went through back when I had a job, and I haven't had a job in 25 years or more, but I mean, I can give you all kinds of scenarios. I used to work at a big corporate bank in their corporate offices, and I had a team of 4 or 5 guys, and we would work on a project for like 3 or 4 months, get it all set up, and then get it done, and then some asshole in some other city, in some other building, in some other distant city, would come in and fuck up our entire project. And there was nothing we could do about it. And literally nothing, because my boss had nothing to do with that person. It was a completely different person, a completely different building. So the only way to solve that problem was for my boss to yell at his boss, and his boss to yell at his boss, and his boss to yell at his boss, and then yell at the boss over in the other building and drop it down 3 or 4. In other words, it never happened. It was a fucking mess. And that's just one example. I have worked in scenarios where people have been screaming and yelling in the office. I had a guy once when I worked for that same company, that same bank. I worked in this room with 3 other guys. 4 other guys? No, like 4 other guys. And one of the guys was basically psychotic. He had some kind of personality disorder. And on a semi-regular basis, he would come in and scream and throw things. He would like throw staplers and like shove stuff off his desk onto the floor and raise his voice and rant and scream. What was I able to do about that? I wasn't his boss. I could complain about him to my boss, and my boss said, oh yeah, yeah, you're right. We should handle that. And nothing ever fucking happened. You know how this works. If you work in corporate America or corporate environment, I should say, if you're outside the USA, you have to do that when you are a fucking job slave. Now, when you have your own business, guess what? You don't have to work with anyone you don't like. Anybody, including customers and clients. So let me cover both angles on this. When you have your own business, are you gonna have a boss? An asshole boss? No, you're a boss. Now you have customers you report to, but I'll cover that in a second. Are you gonna have an asshole boss? No. Or an asshole boss above your boss? Because I've had that scenario when I had jobs. My boss was pretty cool. I had some jobs where my boss was okay, but the boss above him was a fucking nightmare. So he's even worse. And so my boss cowered every time the bitch boss or asshole boss, because I had both, yelled at him or us. So you're ever gonna have that problem if you have your own business? Nope, never. No one will ever tell you what to do like that, okay? Are you ever gonna have employees, or in Alpha 2.0, we don't have employees, we have contractors, but are you ever gonna have people on your staff who you fucking hate and you don't wanna work with? No, because you fire them. As soon as they fuck up or they're rude or they're mean, you fire them, and then you don't have a problem anymore. So you don't have to work with anyone when you have your own business. You're not required to do this, right? Now let's flip it to customers. People say, well, you know, you do have a boss when you have your own business. It's your customers and your clients. They're your boss. That is true. However, there's one big difference. when you have your own business versus when you have your job. You can fire your boss. And I've done it. Certainly in my consulting practice, I've worked with, and it was very rare, it didn't happen very often, but I've had scenarios, I've mentioned a few of these things before in some of my other content, where I would have clients who were pricks, clients who were assholes, clients who didn't pay me, or would fight me, or would treat me unfairly or whatever. Guess what I did? Boom, gone, they're fired. Hey, I'm very sorry, this isn't working out. Let's end the relationship. I wish you the best. And if you want someone to help you make this transition, I can help you find a different consultant if you'd like, blah, 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 blah. But I fired my clients. In my Alpha 2.0 company, every once in a while, I know you'll be shocked to hear this, but every once in a while we get psychos. We get psychopaths who try to rip us off or verbally assault me or verbally assault our staff over email. You know what I do? We fire the customer. We refund their money if they ask you for a refund, and we just block all their IP addresses and block their accounts, and we make some records about who the person was, and we just refuse to do business with that person anymore. Very, very simple. It happens. Doesn't happen very often, but it happens because I'm not going to work with anyone I don't like. It's that simple. You have that option and you have that authority when you have your own business. Can you do that when you have a fucking job? No, because your big daddy or big mommy boss makes you work with these people you hate. Being an employee sucks. You don't realize how much it sucks. A lot of you who are employees right now, you don't realize how much it sucks because you're used to the suck. You've been an employee for so long, you put up with this bullshit for so long, the taxes, the lack of freedom, the office politics, the bullshit at work, all the limitations you have on your life, all the opportunity costs and the things you're not accomplishing because you're at your goddamn job all day. You're so accustomed to that horrible, horrible bullshit that you're just kind of numb to it at this point and you're just putting up with it. I've gotten some of your emails. I can tell that's where you are. Having a job sucks. Not only is it worse than having your own business, it's more dangerous than having your own business. I have my own company. I have several companies. Could I be fired? No. Can my companies fire me? No. No. And that's certainly true in Alpha 2.0 because I teach you own 100% of your own companies. You don't want to be like Steve Jobs and hand over control to a board who can fire you, which is what happened to him at Apple many years ago, as you may know. So no, if you follow Alpha 2.0 business models, you can never be fired. So my companies can never fire me. I can't be fired. Can I be laid off? If the economy takes a downturn and suddenly I lose a bunch of business, does that mean I'm fucked and I can't pay my bills? No, I've explained many times in other content how that's happened to me twice in two different economic conditions. One in 2008, where I lost a big hunk of my income. No, I just very quickly rejiggered what I was doing, reoriented what I was doing, adjusted to the new normal, and I was able to stay in business. You have that opportunity when you have your own business. Can you do that in a job? If your company lays you off or fires you, can you go back to your boss? Let's say they lay you off. Can you go to your boss and say, hey boss, wait. I'll make you a deal. Keep me on the payroll and I'm gonna completely redo what I do here at the company and just keep me on the payroll. Your boss say, what? No, get out of here. I don't have the authority to do that even if I wanted to. No, you don't. But in a business, you have something that employees don't have. You have flexibility. You can pivot at any point in time you need to in a business if you encounter any problems, including major problems. That's why I haven't had a job since, 1996. It's a long, long time, 25 years or so. Why? Certainly there have been down economies and shitty economies since between now and 1996, right? Several of them. I survived all of them. Why? Because I can pivot. I can quickly change what I'm doing and I can quickly pivot to new scenarios where I can get some income in. Maybe not as much, but I can get some, which means I don't lose my quote unquote job. Unlike you, if you have a fucking job and you get fired or laid off, there's literally nothing you can do about it. You just got to take it in the ass. And now you have no income, and now you panic because you can't pay your bills, and now you're running around like a maniac with your stupid resume trying to get some other boss to give you another job. In other words, you're a beta. I just described the lifestyle of a beta male. Please, someone give me a job because I'm a pussy. I don't know how to make my own money, and I need to be a slave and pay 50% income tax and be forced to work with people I hate and bosses I hate and companies I hate to be in a risky scenario where I could just get laid off again. It's just, even me saying these things makes me feel depressed for you guys with jobs. You need to, if you have a job, you need to seriously consider what I've said in this podcast. Matter of fact, if you have a job, I would recommend you listen to this podcast again. Because I know, a lot of you with jobs have lost touch with the pain and suffering you're encountering on a daily basis, not to mention the opportunity cost of things you can't accomplish in your life because you have a goddamn job. You're like, well, it's not, I got a job and it sucks, but it's not too bad. I work with some cool people and I work on some fun projects. And you can't work with cool people when you have your own business. I do. You can't work on fun projects when you have your own business. They're way more fun because you can pick the projects. Didn't even talk about that, but you get my point. Any excuse you have, just about, unless your scenario is very unusual and very weird, any excuse you have about, well, I got to keep my job because of X, Y, and Z, I can counter it. No, you fucking don't. No, you fucking don't. Start your own business. If you have a job, start your own business on the side using my Alpha 2.0 business models I've talked about in my other content, videos, blog posts, courses, books. I've got all kinds of stuff. A lot of it is free, some of it isn't. Use all that material, start your own business on the side, start working on that on a regular basis so you can quit your fucking job and you don't have to work as much in your new business as you are in your job because you'll pay less taxes in your new business and so on. You need to do that. If you have a job, you are not free. And in the modern era, if you have a job, you are at more risk than guys like me who have our own businesses. And that is fact. This is not pre-1990s. This is the new normal and the new economy. Think about what I said. I will talk to you very soon. Have fun.